Once upon a time, in a city called Terra, there lived a pastor called Uzzah, who was well known for his miraculous healing powers. Everyone adored and respected him because they thought the power of God was in him. But unknown to them, Uzzah was a fake pastor who turned his back on God out of greed and sold his soul to the devil in exchange for powers. Uzzah was raised in a Christian family. His father was a dedicated pastor and his mom was a deaconess. He was their only child, and they made sure that Uzzah never missed Sunday service or any church activities. Uzzah was also the youth leader of his father's church at a young age, and he was always preaching the gospel and sermon to his friends and sometimes to the congregation. Everyone loved Uzzah because of his uprightness and how godly he was. They enjoyed his sermons and would often love to listen to him preach. He was nicknamed the Young Preacher. When Uzzah turned 18, he decided he would be a pastor, just like his father. He told his father of his intentions to be a pastor, just like him, and his father was very happy and glad. His father, Mr. Matthew, loved God with all his heart and made sure that his family also did the same. So he was very proud of Uzzah for the path he made up his mind to follow. When Uzzah turned 22, he decided to start his own church. He told his father about his intentions to spread the word of God and how he wanted to open his own church in the city where there were lots of people. His father granted his requests and gave Uzzah his blessings. After fasting and praying fervently, Uzzah decided to relocate to a big city called Terra. He packed his things, and when he got to Terra, it was very late in the night. There was no room in any of the affordable hotels, so Uzzah was helpless. He walked down the streets of Terra with his luggage in his hands, looking for a place to spend the night. This was when he met Frank, a cab driver in Terra who was still a bachelor. Uzzah explained his situation to Frank, and Frank had pity on him. He took Uzzah to his house to spend the night. Uzzah was very grateful to Frank, and after that day, they became very close friends. As they both laid on the bed to sleep that night, something bothered Uzzah, so he asked Frank, "How is it possible that all the hotels in Terra are full? Is it always this way?" Frank laughed at Uzzah because he was naive and new to the city. Frank explained to Uzzah that once in every year, a lot of people from other towns and countries often came to Terra town to attend a very special church program being held by a popular pastor called Pastor Uche. Pastor Uche was well known for his powerful miracles, healing powers, and prophecies. People often traveled from far and wide just to meet him. Uzzah thanked Frank for his explanation and slept off. The next day, Frank took Uzzah around Terra. Unfortunately, he found a small hall which he rented for his church. He bought some chairs and printed a banner. Then he started his ministry. Pastor Uzzah would go around the city, preaching the word of God to the residents. Only a few people loved the way he preached, and they started attending his church, while the other people were more focused on miracles and prophecies. A month after Uzzah started his church, he had only a few members in his church building, including the cab driver. Pastor Uzzah's members were faithful and very dedicated to the things of God, and this made him very happy because that was what he always wanted. But one fateful day, Pastor Uzo was walking down the streets of Terra when a very luxurious car drove past him. The car stopped in front of a mall, and a very young man, almost the same age as Pastor Uzo, stepped down from the car. As Pastor Uzo watched the man enter the mall, he overheard two men talking about Pastor Uche behind him. Pastor Uche is very rich. Do you know how many cars he has? What do you expect when he has one of the biggest churches in this city with millions of members worldwide? I even heard he makes nothing less than 5 million naira every Sunday from tithes and offering. He's chosen by God, so it is expected he can never be poor again in life. You see, the owner of that mall is his member. She doesn't collect a dime from him whenever he goes there to buy groceries. I even heard that a member of his church gifted him a mansion just last month. Uzo couldn't control his curiosity anymore, so he went to meet the two men and started asking them questions about Pastor Uche. He remembered that Frank once told him about Pastor Uche, but they didn't talk much about him. Pastor Uzo got to know that Pastor Uche came to the city of Terra only 2 years ago, and he owns one of the biggest churches in the town already. He was a millionaire who gets cash and property from his numerous members as gifts from time to time. The following Sunday, after Sunday service at Uzo's church, he counted the offerings and tithes and was strangely dissatisfied with the amount he realized. The story he had about Pastor Uche crept into his thoughts once again, and he found himself being envious and greedy. The next day, Pastor Uzo decided to visit Pastor Uche's church. When he got there, he was shocked at the number of members he had. What got him more shocked was the fact that Pastor Uche stood on the pulpit and preached for just 30 minutes before stepping down. Uzo was disappointed that Pastor Uche didn't talk about salvation, except riches, success, wealth, and prosperity. I can preach better than this man. I preach for 2 long hours and get peanuts, but he's talking for just 30 minutes and he's making millions. I have to do something to get members as well. While he walked home from Pastor Uche's church, he couldn't stop thinking about what he witnessed. He remembered how the members danced in groups to give their offerings, and how a single member gave a tithe of 1 million naira. Pastor Uzo suddenly found himself being swallowed in greed and envy. He became very restless and desperately wanted to be like Pastor Uche. The following Sunday, after church service, Uzo and Frank counted the offerings the member gave, and Frank could see how disappointed Uzo was. "What is the matter?" Frank asked him. Uzo hesitated for a while and then he told Frank, "I went to Uche's church some days ago and I was shocked by what I saw. Pastor Uche got a tithe of 1 million naira on that Sunday alone, amongst the other offerings his members gave. I'm a good preacher and I love God, yet I don't earn up to 10,000 naira every week. Why can't I get members like him?" Frank looked at Uzo with pity. He understood what Uzo was feeling because he always looked at other rich people and asked himself why he was not as rich as them, despite how hardworking he was. Frank said to Uzo, "People flock to Uche's church because he can perform miracles. He can heal the sick, and he can also give prophecies. People love these things, and they don't really care about salvation. They only want miracles and blessings. But I am not yet spiritually strong enough to perform miracles. It takes the grace of God to heal the sick and give prophecy. Besides, the The gospel is more about salvation and not just riches. Frank drew closer to Uzo. He looked left and right to be sure that there was no one else in the church except the both of them. I know of a very powerful man called Baba Ijebu. He knows very much about the spiritual and human realm. I once carried him in my vehicle and we discussed for many hours about the spiritual realm. He's no ordinary man because he knows the secret of most prominent pastors. Whatever power and secrets you seek, he has the answers to them. I will invite him so that he will tell you what you need to do to know about spirituality and becoming a powerful man of God. Uzo suddenly shifted away from Frank. He couldn't believe his ears. What are you saying? I should meet the devil for powers? Do you think the devil gives things for free? Haven't you learned anything from my sermons? Baba Ijebu is not the devil. He's just a gifted man who can communicate with the spirits. He knows so much about the spiritual realm and that's all. He will educate you on what to do to become a successful man of God. There's nothing fetish about this man at all. Okay, if you say he's not fetish, then I would like to meet him. But make sure he is who you said he is. Don't you trust my judgment anymore? Frank replied. I love God too, and I can't mislead you. We both want the same thing. Frank placed a call across to the man named Baba Ijebu, and they made arrangements on the day and time that he would meet with Pastor Uzo. One hot Sunday afternoon after church service, Baba Ijebu arrived at Uzo's church. He met Uzo and Frank sitting inside the church. They exchanged pleasantries and Baba Ijebu was offered a seat. Baba Ijebu began to tell them the secrets surrounding the miracles some men of God perform and how they obtain their powers. He brought out a container and showed them. Then he said to them, with this container, you'll be able to fetch water from a tree called a living tree. The tree looks like a human being with water flowing from its anus. Once you obtain this water and sprinkle it at the four corners of your church, any member who steps into your church will never leave your church no matter what you say or do to them. They will remain loyal to you until the end of time and worship you as their God. Then he brought out a second container with some red substance inside, and he told them, this substance is called seer. Once you place it on your mouth and eyes, you will see visions, you will prophesy, and see beyond people's physical attributes. Not only that, you will heal the sick and perform miracles. However, be aware that the miracles don't last. It is only temporal. If you heal a sick man today, after 2 weeks, he will become sick once again and become worse than he was before. They are just made to be a mirage. All these items will be handed over to you by our master, the guardian of the Lulu deity, who is at the 24th rank. Once you follow me to our realm, all these products will be yours. But first, you need to be our member and start operating from rank 1 under Master Lulu. As time progresses, you will start growing up in ranks. Uzo was shocked and couldn't believe what his ears were hearing. He turned and looked at Frank in amazement with his eyes widened. Then he turned around once again and asked Baba Ijebu, where is your realm located? Our realm is located outside the human realm, beyond the comprehension of human eyes. I am only a representative sent by the Master Lulu to help poor men of God like you recruit souls to our kingdom. In return, we will give you endless powers and you will become wealthy. If you are interested, I can take you to our kingdom. We have a gathering at the end of every month. When you come there, you will meet different big and prominent men of God. But you know there is no going back once you get there. Ozo was provoked by Baba Ijebu's last statement. His facial expression suddenly changed. Baba Ijebu noticed this and asked him, "Don't you want to be recognized as one of the biggest pastors in this city? Let us meet the master of Lulu. He would make that possible. If you can perform miracles and heal the sick, if you can give prophecies and predict the future, then the people of Terra would do anything to be a member of your church. Please count me out and don't ever tell me something like this again. I am not interested in serving any fetish god. I thought you were prescribing a herbal extract that can enhance my spirituality. Please leave my church." Ozo screamed, almost pushing Baba Ijebu out of his church. When Baba Ijebu saw how furious and unwilling Ozo was, he stood up and left the church. Ozo gave Frank some of the offering money as his salary for playing the instrument and also walked away in anger. But just as a seed planted on a fertile soil, the words of Baba Ijebu remained in Ozo's thoughts. After that day, Ozo increased his prayers and prepared his sermons to be more powerful. He went out often to preach and spread the gospel and increased his time with God. But 1 month later, his church still remained the same. In fact, from the 15 members he once had, 3 of them were no longer coming to his church. Ozo felt disappointed in himself and felt like a failure. Pastor Uche's church continued to increase, so he built another branch outside of town, but Ozo was struggling to keep the little members he had. He began to think about Baba Ijebu's words. "Don't you want to be recognized as one of the biggest pastors in this city? Let us meet the guardian of Lulu. He will make that possible. If you can perform miracles and heal the sick, you can give prophecies and predict the future, then the people of Terra would do anything to be a member of your church." On different occasions, Frank, his friend, tried to convince Ozo to do what Baba Ijebu told him, but Ozo refused to listen. Ozo was brought up in a Christian home, so his faith was very strong. However, recent events were pushing him to break his vow to God. The next Sunday, Pastor Ozo was preaching on the pulpit when a woman rushed into the church with her sick daughter. Pastor, please help me. My daughter is dying. She's very sick. Pray for her and heal her, Pastor." All the members widened their eyes in anticipation of a miracle for the first time as Pastor Ozo laid his hands on the sick girl and shouted, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you, spirits of sickness, to leave her body right now." But the young girl remained unconscious. Pastor Ozo felt disappointed. He screamed again with his hands on the girl's head. "I declare your body free from sickness in Jesus' name." But nothing happened. The woman carried her daughter out of anger and yelled at Pastor Ozo, "You fake pastor. If only Pastor Uche would touch my daughter, I'm sure she will be healed instantly." Pastor Ozo watched as the woman left his church with her daughter. He felt humiliated and ashamed. Immediately, 2 of his members followed her behind. Pastor Ozo couldn't bear the shame. He quickly shared the grace and halted service for that day. Frank stood beside him. He watched everything unfold. And when everyone had left, Pastor Ozo sat down in one of the benches looking discouraged. Frank went to sit by him and told him once again, "You are not betraying God by meeting Baba Ijebu. You can bring more people to God using Baba Ijebu's power. Imagine how large your members would be if you can perform miracles. You're a good pastor, but that is not enough. Let Baba Ijebu help you. Or do you want to go back to your hometown in shame?" In that state of vulnerability, Pastor Ozo couldn't decline Frank's advice anymore. He was deeply discouraged and was ready to do anything to be like Pastor Uche. Pastor Ozo asked Frank to call Baba Ijebu and tell him he was ready to visit his realm and meet the guardian of Lulu. The next day, Baba Ijebu arrived at the church. He saw Pastor Ozo and Frank carrying bags as if they wanted to travel. Pastor Ozo and Frank thought it was going to be a long journey, so they carried some clothes needed for the journey. Baba Ijebu laughed at them and told them there was no need for the bags. It was already 4 o'clock in the evening, and Baba Ijebu told them that the journey was not a physical one, but a spiritual one. He told them to sit down inside the church and wait for an additional 4 hours when the door to the dark spiritual realm would be opened. This was when they could transit to the other realm. They sat quietly inside the church waiting for 4 hours, and after hours of waiting, it was finally getting dark. They anxiously waited for the clock to hit 8 p.m. Once it was 8 p.m. on the dot, Baba Ijebu stood up and asked them to follow him. Baba Ijebu moved to the wall on the pulpit and brought out a white chalk from his bag. He drew a round shape on the wall like a door, and immediately a portal was made on the wall. The wall opened and a very heavy cold wind blew from the entrance. On the other side of the portal, there was a dark forest with trees. Pastor Ozo and Frank were surprised, with chills running down their spine. They became scared, but Baba Ijebu told them not to be afraid, as there was nothing for them to worry about. Pastor Ozo and Frank had never seen anything like that in their entire life, so it made them really scared. Baba Ijebu led the way into the dark forest, and they followed him behind. They saw different kinds of trees. One had a mouth and eyes. Another tree had a human face, and another with its mouth wide open. It was a scary realm and so different from the human realm. It was a very dark and thick forest, but Ozo trusted Frank and Baba Ijebu. As they walked, Ozo tried to convince himself to go back, but he ignored the warnings in his heart. He told himself that he would be bringing more people to God by doing this. They walked and walked until they arrived at a very big temple with a human statue in front of it. Baba Ijebu walked into the temple and they followed. But as soon as they walked into the temple, a very deep voice echoed, "Who are those walking into my temple with their shoes on? Remove your shoes." Frank and Ozo became very scared and nearly peed in their pants. They quickly removed their shoes as the voice instructed and walked into the huge temple. When they got there, they both knelt down before the altar, and a man looking very old with no eyes on his face and a long white beard appeared. He was wearing a robe that covered his entire body. He said in a voice that echoed, "I am the guardian of Lulu, the 24th master and the overall master of the Lulu realm. What have you come to seek, you narrow-minded mortals?" Baba Ijebu replied, "O master of the 24th, these are pastors who have come to seek your endless power to perform wonders. They have come to seek thy help, O master. They want to heal the sick, raise the dead, and prophesy. If you can grant them these wishes, they are willing to lay down their souls. Their souls will be yours, and the wonders they perform will be to your glory, O master." The master let out a loud laughter and asked them, "Are you willing to give your souls to me? Do you promise to bring more souls?" Pastor Ozo quickly nodded in agreement. The master pointed to a basin by the corner of the temple and asked them to wash their hands, which they did. He gave Pastor Ozo a container and told him to always apply the contents on his lips before holding any service. He told Ozo that his members would believe every word that comes out of his mouth and would not have any reason to doubt him. he gave Pastor Ozo a second container and told him, "Apply the contents of this container to your eyes, and you will see the vision to prophesy and heal people when you lay your hands on them. But one thing is very important. Never mention the name above every other name, the name that Christians mention when they perform miracles." Pastor Ozo became confused and asked him, "Do you mean the name of Jesus Christ?" Immediately, there was a great thunder strike and lightning across the whole temple. Everywhere shook for a few minutes and then became still. The master fell on the ground and became very angry. He screamed at Pastor Ozo, "How dare you mention that name here? Didn't I warn you not to mention that name?" Baba Ijebu fell down to his face, pleading on their behalf. "Oh, Master, let their anger be calm. They are still new and perhaps do not know the rule yet. Please remember they are souls willing to work for you." The master calmed down and brought out a white bottle. He gave it to Ozo and said, "Use this container to fetch water from the living tree outside the temple and sprinkle this water inside the church premises every day. Anyone who steps into your church will have no reason to leave. In no time, you will have numerous members willing to defend and die for you." Pastor Ozo was very happy. He smiled because all that he always dreamt of were suddenly coming to pass. The master gave him a white chalk and told him that he should use it to transition between the mortal realm and the spiritual. And he also told Ozo to always attend their meetings, which was held every last day of the month. When Ozo shows up at the next meeting, then he would be told what he needs to bring in exchange for the powers that he is given. Baba Ijebu, Pastor Ozo, and Frank were very excited. They thanked the master and left the temple immediately. Baba Ijebu took Frank and Ozo through a door inside the house. When they passed through the door, it was like a portal to a different world. Ozo found himself inside another forest. He could not tell if it was day or night because the sky was very red and there was no sun or moon. The trees were so long that you can't see where they ended, and there were flowers that looked like snakes. Ozo and Frank followed Baba Ijebu until they walked through the forest and arrived at a very big tree which was bigger than the rest and stood on its own. The tree looked like a human with water running through the anus. Baba Ijebu told Pastor Ozo to quickly fetch water from the tree, which Pastor Ozo did immediately. After taking the water, they went back through the entrance and appeared at the church. They were very happy that they had succeeded and were surprised that it was even easier than they had initially thought. But unknown to them, they would eventually have to pay through their nose. They did as the man instructed. They took the water and poured it at the four corners of the church just as they were instructed. Ozo started to use the substance. He applied it on his mouth and went out to the street to resume his preaching as usual. While he was preaching on the streets, he saw a blind man who was singing and begging for alms from passerbys. Ozo walked up to the man and prayed for him. Then suddenly, the man regained his sight and started jubilation. People gathered around them and asked what happened. The man, who was once blind, explained to them that he was blind from birth, but after Ozo prayed for him, he regained his sight. Everyone was surprised and marveled at the miracle. So they started asking Ozo where his church was. They were very curious. After this, Ozo's church gained massive members to the extent that the seats in his church were not enough to accommodate the number of people who came to his church. People would stand outside the church just to listen to his preaching. Uzzah continued to perform miracles and signs and wonders, using the substance that the Grand Master gave to him. In just 3 weeks, Uzzah moved to a bigger hall and bought more chairs to accommodate his ever-growing members. When it was the end of the month, it was time for Uzzah to show up for the meeting, just like every other pastor, businessman, politician, prominent and influential man who came to Master Lulu to use their powers to excel in life. Uzzah drew a line on the wall just as the man had previously instructed, and a realm to the strange world was revealed once again. Then he went through. When he got to the meeting, Uzzah was shocked and marveled to see many men of God, including the ones he had never heard of and those he knew, top-ranking politicians as well as known entrepreneurs, just like Baba Ijebu said. When the meeting started, Uzzah was called to come outside for everyone to see him, since he was a new member. He needed to be familiar with the other existing members and giving some details, such as the things he would have to give in exchange for the powers they would receive from Lulu. While Uzzah stood and waited, the master consulted with Lulu, and after making some incantations, they told Uzzah that the price he had to pay for the power he would always get is a blood sacrifice. Every month, a member of his church would be sacrificed to Lulu, but the member would be sacrificed randomly, picked by Lulu and not Uzzah himself. Uzzah laughed at the price. He had previously felt it would be a very difficult price to pay. He told the man that he had no problem with that. Even if you want 2 members, go ahead, as long as my powers are intact. After the meeting, Uzzah continued preaching and performing miracles. He expanded his church from the small hall to a very big auditorium. He became well known and very wealthy, riding the latest expensive cars and going around town with security. One day, he decided that it was time for him to settle down. There was a member of his church called Ifeoma. She was the choir leader and was very beautiful. She also had a very nice and angelic voice. Uzzah had feelings for Ifeoma, so he asked her out and told her that the Lord appeared to him in a dream and told him that she would be his wife. Ifeoma was very happy, because being Uzzah's wife meant that all the women in the church would see her as their mother and give her enough respect. So she accepted to marry him. They had a very expensive and elaborate wedding, which was the talk of town for a long time. 6 months after Uzzah started using the powers of Lulu to establish his ministry, a new member called Grace came to his church. She had been hearing of his powerful and spiritual gifts and decided to be his member. Grace was a very dedicated Christian and was very serious with the things of the Lord. She felt Uzzah was a genuine man of God with spiritual gifts from God himself. But unknown to her, he was the total opposite of everything she stood for. When she started worshiping in the church, she joined many departments in the church so she would serve God better. Uzzah saw how dedicated and serious Grace was about the things of God and decided to make her a deaconess in his church. However, at the end of the month, which Grace was appointed as a deaconess, during the meeting that Uzzah had with the spiritual realm of Lulu for the renewal of his powers, Lulu picked Grace, the newly appointed deaconess, as the next member of his church to be sacrificed in exchange for his powers. When she was chosen, Lulu started afflicting her with all manner of sicknesses and setbacks in life. Each time Grace went for checkup in the hospital, the doctors would tell her that she was fine and her sickness wasn't a medical problem. She went to various hospitals for tests and scans, but they all told her she was fine and that their machines couldn't detect anything wrong with her. However, her health kept deteriorating rapidly.
What will happen to Grace? Will Grace die from the sickness inflicted on her? Will she pay for the sins she knows nothing about with her own life? We will find out in the next episodes. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe and like. Also share if you enjoyed this story.